The sky that evening was the color of ashes, the kind that linger after a fire has burned too long. Dust rolled low across the street, stirred by boots that moved with cruel purpose. On the wooden planks of the boardwalk, men leaned against railings and spat tobacco, their eyes fixed on a scene unfolding in the dirt road. The town had grown restless that week. Whiskey had been cheap, tempers high, and the foreign faces who kept to themselves in the shack near the edge of the settlement had become easy targets for anger no man cared to name. A woman stood in the center of that road, her body bent against the jeers and the blows. She was small, the lines of her dress plain, her dark hair pulled back with care though now strands had torn free to stick to her cheeks. She held her shawl tight at her shoulders, as if the fabric alone could protect her from fists and stones. Her face was pale but flushed with the sting of shame. She did not cry out. That was the cruelest part, the way she endured in silence while laughter roared around her. "Go back to where you came from." A man sneered, swinging his boot so that mud splattered against her skirt. Another shouted something sharper, the slur carrying in the evening air, and a ripple of agreement followed. The crowd was not large, only half a dozen with courage enough to throw the first insults, but from the shadows of doorways others watched. They did not intervene. They simply stood as witnesses, letting the shame soak in the ground like spilled liquor. A stone struck her shoulder, then another her back. She staggered but did not fall. One of the men, emboldened, grabbed the basket she carried and overturned it. Dry rice spilled into the dust like a scatter of pearls, trampled underfoot before her eyes. He grinned at his cruelty, and the crowd barked his approval. Still she did not lift her voice. But from behind, a smaller voice broke the air. "Stop. Leave her alone." It was her daughter, no more than 9 years old, thin as the saplings by the creek. She darted forward, trying to shield her mother with arms that were far too small. A grown hand shoved her back, and she stumbled into the dirt. Her eyes, wide with terror, searched the faces around her. They were the eyes of a child who already knew the weight of hatred she did not earn. Tears gathered, though she fought them down. She had heard her mother's words often enough. Endure. Silence is safer than defiance. But something in her broke as she watched the woman she loved reduced to shame before men who saw her as less than human. Her voice, small but clear, carried over the noise. "They're beating my mom for being Chinese." For a moment the words hung, sharp as a crack of thunder. The men faltered, not from guilt but from the sting of being named. The girl's cry was not accusation. It was truth too raw to ignore. And yet it changed nothing. One of them laughed, a sound as hollow as a broken bell. "Best learn it young, girl," he said. "That's the way of things here." The child stood frozen, her chest heaving, her throat tight with helpless rage. She wanted to run at them, to claw with her nails, but she knew she was nothing before their boots. Shame burned hotter than fear, until at last she turned and fled. Her small legs carried her past the well, past the shuttered windows, past the indifferent gazes of women who clutched their children close and looked away. Barefoot, she ran beyond the town's edge, past the wheat fields, where stalks bent in the wind like weary backs, past the rail fence where crows perched silent, watching. The ground was hard, cutting at her feet, but she did not stop. Her breaths tore at her chest. Her tears blurred the world, yet she knew where she was going, for she had seen him once before, at the line where forest met prairie. A man apart, his shoulders broad beneath buckskin, his hair black as raven feathers. He had stood with the stillness of stone, watching the horizon as though it carried secrets only he could read. She had been afraid then, clinging to her mother's hand. "Shawnee," someone had whispered, half in fear, half in disdain. That memory returned now, sharper than ever. She plunged into the trees, the air cool and damp beneath the branches. Crickets sang. Shadows deepened. The girl's heart pounded not only from a run but from a fear that she might not find him, that her hope was a foolish dream. But then she saw it. A glimmer of fire through the dark, a wisp of smoke rising above the tree-line. Her step slowed. She crept nearer, leaves crunching beneath her soles. At last she stumbled into the clearing, her chest heaving, her hair tangled and wild. There he was, seated by a low fire, carving wood with steady hands. His eyes lifted at the sound of her approach, calm and unreadable. She froze under his gaze. For a moment she could not breathe. She had rehearsed no words, only carried the desperate need that had driven her here. Her lips trembled, her throat dry, then it spilled out all at once. Please, please save her. Her voice cracked, breaking into a sob. She covered her face with her hands, ashamed of her weakness. The silence stretched long. The fire popped. An owl hooted in the distance. She dared a glance through her fingers and saw that he had not moved. He only studied her, his expression as patient as the earth itself. She feared then that he would refuse, that he would turn away, as so many others had. The thought made her knees buckle, and she sank into the dirt, choking on her breath. "They'll kill her," she whispered. "My mom, they're beating her." The warrior set aside the piece of wood and the blade. He rose slowly, his height casting a shadow that reached across the firelight. The girl looked up, startled by the sheer presence of him. She expected him to speak, but no words came. Instead, he bent, lifted the blanket from his shoulders, and wrapped it around her, though it smelled of smoke and pine. Its weight steadied her trembling. She clutched the blanket tight, warmth seeping into her bones. Her sobs eased into shivers. His silence, she realized, was not indifference. It was deliberation. His eyes, dark and steady, held hers until she could breathe again. Without a word, he turned and began to walk. The girl stumbled to her feet, clutching the blanket, and hurried after him. Branches snapped underfoot as they moved through the woods. She tried to speak, to beg again, but her throat held only silence. His pace was even, unhurried, as though he knew the way without doubt. The trees thinned. The glow of lanterns returned, faint at first, then brighter. Voices carried on the night air. The jeers, the cruel laughter, the sound of fists meeting flesh. The girl's stomach twisted. She clutched the warrior's blanket tighter and prayed. At the edge of the clearing, they stopped. Together they saw her mother still standing in the road, her shawl torn, her basket empty, men circling like vultures. She swayed but did not fall. The warrior stepped forward, his presence filling the space with a quiet that silenced even the insects. His shadow stretched across the dirt as he approached. The men turned, startled. One spat, another cursed, but their laughter faltered. There was no anger in him, no weapon raised. Only the stillness of stone, the calm of deep water. He moved to the woman's side and placed a hand, gentle but firm, on her shoulder. She flinched at his touch, shame and fear battling within her. But his grip did not tighten. It only steadied her, kept her upright. The girl rushed forward, burying herself against her mother's torn dress. The crowd shifted uneasily. A murmur rose. "Savage," someone muttered. "Chinese whore," another spat. Yet none stepped closer. The warrior's silence was heavier than any threat. He met their eyes one by one, and in that gaze was something ancient, unbroken, a refusal to bow. The laughter died. One by one, the men drew back. They spat into the dirt, muttered curses, and retreated into the shadows from which they had come. The street grew still again. Only the three remained, mother, daughter, and the man who had come at their plea. The woman could not yet look at him. Her face burned with shame, not gratitude. She drew her child close, trembling. The girl, however, looked from her mother to the warrior, her eyes wide with wonder. He had done nothing but stand, yet it had been enough. The firelight from his camp still clung to his blanket around her shoulders. She clutched it tighter, sensing that the night had shifted, that something had begun, though she could not yet name it. And as the moon rose over the silent town, the three of them stood together in the dust, the echoes of cruelty still lingering, but new, fragile thread binding them against the dark. The dust had not yet settled when the last of the men faded into the shadows. The street stood quiet, though the silence was thick with what had been spoken and what had been left unsaid. The woman trembled, her shawl torn and streaked with dirt. The child clung to her waist, her small face pressed into the fabric as though to hide her mother's shame from memory. The warrior's hand lifted from the woman's shoulder, not forcing her to rise straighter, only steadying her until her knees could bear her own weight. She could not bring herself to look at him. Her eyes remained fixed on the ground, on the scattered rice trampled into the mud. Every grain was a reminder of dignity lost, and she felt their crunch under the soles of the men long after they were gone. She wanted to gather them, to brush them clean, to restore order to the basket that had been her offering of livelihood, but her body would not bend. She stood hollow, wishing the earth would swallow her whole. The girl's voice, raw and small, broke the stillness. "We have to go," she whispered. She was speaking not only to her mother but to him, the man who stood like a shadow between them and the town's hatred. She gripped the blanket around her shoulders, a shield she would not release. The warrior glanced once down the street, his face unreadable, then began to walk. His steps were slow, deliberate. He did not look back, but the girl tugged her mother's hand, urging her to follow. The woman hesitated, her pride resisting the path that placed her safety in the care of another. Yet the torches she feared might return were still burning in her mind. She lowered her eyes and allowed her child to lead her, trailing the silent figure who cut through the night like a tall shadow. They passed homes shuttered against them, lanterns glowing behind curtains that twitched as they walked by. No words were offered, no doors opened, only stares heavy with judgment, whispers muted behind thin walls. Shame clung like a second skin. By the time they reached the edge of town, the woman's breath had grown shallow. She paused, her hand pressed to her chest, her body heavy with exhaustion. The warrior stopped without turning, as though he could feel her falter. He did not extend his arm, did not offer words, yet the stillness of his waiting became its own kind of invitation. She gathered herself, lifted her child into her arms, and continued. The prairie opened wide before them, dark beneath a canopy of stars. The girl looked upward, comforted by the endless scatter of light, but the woman kept her gaze on the earth. She feared the open land as much as the town. Out here, there were no walls, no law, no shield but the stranger's presence. She asked herself why he had come at all. What had her child's plea stirred in him? Was it pity or something colder? A responsibility he had not asked for? The warrior led them into the woods, where branches arched overhead like the ribs of a cathedral. The night smelled of damp moss and pine. The ground was soft, muffling their steps. At last they came upon a cabin set in a small clearing, its roof low and smoke rising faintly from a chimney. The fire inside painted the windows orange. The girl's eyes widened. She had imagined some great lodge, a fortress, but it was simple. One room, walls made of rough-hewn logs, a door hanging slightly crooked on its hinges. To her, it seemed a palace, a place untouched by the cruelty of the town. The warrior pushed open the door and stepped inside. He left it wide for them to follow, though he spoke no word of welcome. The woman lingered on the threshold, her pride warring with her need. Her hands shook as she pulled her daughter closer. Then, with a shiver, she crossed into the cabin. The air was warm, heavy with smoke, and the scent of dried herbs hung from the rafters. A small fire burned low in the stone hearth. A wooden table stood in the corner, scarred from years of use, with a single bowl and knife resting upon it. Along the wall lay a bed of furs, neatly arranged, and another straw on the floor. It was sparse, yet every object bore the mark of care. The warrior took a pot from the hearth and poured steaming broth into the bowl. He set it on the table and stepped back. The gesture was not command, but offering. The girl, still clutching the blanket, approached first. She dipped her fingers, tasted the broth, and her eyes widened at its warmth. She pulled at her mother's hand. "Eat," she urged. But the woman could not. Pride sealed her lips tighter than hunger could loosen. To accept would be to admit weakness, and weakness was the very wound the town had beaten into her. She shook her head and lowered herself onto the straw mat, pulling her daughter close. The girl ate instead, quietly, grateful for the heat filling her stomach. The warrior sat across the room, his back to the wall, sharpening his blade with slow, measured strokes. He did not press them with questions, did not demand thanks. His silence was heavier than any words, yet oddly it gave space for breath. The fire cracked, and the girl's eyelids grew heavy until she drifted into sleep against her mother's arm. The woman remained awake, staring into flames. Shame battled with gratitude in her chest. She wondered if the townsfolk would come for them again, if this cabin would become a trap rather than a refuge. She wondered, too, what price would be demanded for the shelter. Men seldom gave without asking something in return. Her jaw tightened at the thought. She vowed that whatever came, she would not bend further than she already had. At dawn, the town was alive with gossip. The scene of the beating had grown in retelling. Some claimed the warrior had threatened them with a knife. Others insisted he had spoken curses in a language unholy. Mothers pulled their children away from the well when the girl appeared. Merchants closed their shutters when the woman passed. It was not enough that they had endured humiliation in the street. Now they bore the weight of suspicion, cast as conspirators of the man who had sheltered them. At the general store, the shopkeeper shook his head before the woman could even open her mouth. "We don't sell to your kind," he said, not raising his eyes. She turned away without protest, her child clutching her hand, cheeks flushed with confusion and shame. On the boardwalk, voices trailed after them. Snickers, words half hidden behind laughter. Each syllable struck sharper than a fist. By evening, they returned to the cabin empty-handed. The girl's shoulders sagged, but the warrior set a bundle of dried fish by the hearth. The mother hesitated, then took it. She cooked without a word, and when the girl ate, she watched her silently, the bitterness of dependence filling her throat more than the food. Days passed this way. The town's coldness deepened, and the cabin became both refuge and prison. The girl wandered its edges with curiosity, gathering wildflowers and laying them in a tin cup by the window. The mother mended their torn clothes with the thread she had carried from her home, her fingers trembling each time she stitched. The warrior moved as though they were simply new shadows in his space, teaching the girl to stack wood, to grind corn with stone, showing her which berries to avoid in the forest. There were no words of promise between them, no declarations, but something unspoken rooted itself in the silence. The girl began to hum while she worked, her voice carrying lightness into the dim cabin. Her mother watched, torn between pride and fear, wondering if hope could survive in a place where hatred prowled just beyond the trees. At night, when the fire burned low, the woman lay awake listening. She heard the forest sigh, the crackle of wood, the warrior's steady breathing from across the room. She remembered the hands that had struck her, the stones that had bruised her skin, and shame washed over her again. Yet when she turned her face toward the hearth, she saw her daughter sleeping peacefully at last. That sight alone gave her the strength to endure another day. One evening, as twilight bled across the horizon, a noise rattled the cabin door. The woman froze, her needle pausing mid-stitch. The girl glanced up, wide-eyed. The warrior rose, crossing the floor with the silence of a stalking wolf. He opened the door slowly. A nail clattered onto the threshold, its tip smeared with pitch. Above, tied crudely to the rafters, dangled the limp body of a crow. Its feathers were black as night, its neck broken, a warning, cruel and wordless. The woman's stomach turned, her breath catching. She reached for her daughter instinctively, pulling her close. The girl buried her face in her mother's side, muffling a sob. The warrior plucked the bird from the beam, his expression unreadable. He stepped outside, cast the corpse in the woods, and shut the door. Inside, the silence was suffocating. The woman trembled, rage and fear boiling beneath her skin. But when she looked across the room, she saw his eyes meet hers for the first time. There was no pity in them, no judgment, only something steady, a quiet recognition. In that gaze, she felt less alone than she had since arriving in this land. She lowered her eyes quickly, ashamed of her weakness. Yet in her chest, a fragile seed of strength began to stir. Perhaps dignity could be reclaimed not in the acceptance of the town, but in the refusal to break beneath its cruelty. That night, as the fire burned low and the girl drifted to sleep, the woman whispered words so soft they were almost prayer. "Thank you." Her voice cracked, barely reaching the air between them. The warrior did not answer. He only placed another log upon the fire, the flames rising to fill the silence with warmth. Outside, the forest stood watch. Inside, 3 exiles shared a fragile shelter, bound by necessity, silence, and the first faint threads of something stronger than fear. The prairie wind carried the scent of rain that night, though the stars glittered too sharply for any storm to be near. Anna sat on the porch steps of her mother's cabin, her hands clasped so tightly that her knuckles ached. Each sound of the night, the hoot of an owl, the rustle of grass, the creak of timbers settling, seemed sharper, as though the world itself were listening for something about to break loose. Inside, her mother lay resting, her breath steady, though a bruise still darkened her cheek from the blows of men who had called her foreign blood a stain upon the town. Anna could not stop replaying the moment she had stood powerless, her heart screaming while fists struck the woman who had borne her. And then the warrior, silent as shadow, eyes like flint, had stepped between them. He had lifted her mother as though she weighed nothing, his presence both shield and sword. The townsfolk had scattered, muttering curses, spitting warnings, but they had not dared press their luck against him. Now he lingered just beyond the lamplight, a tall shape leaning against a cottonwood tree, arms folded across his chest. The moonlight caught the angles of his face, proud and unreadable. He was Shawnee, and to the townsfolk that alone marked him as threat, as trespasser. But to Anna, he was the only reason her mother still drew breath. She rose and crossed the yard, her bare feet silent against the dry earth. He turned his head slightly when she neared, acknowledging her without word. "You should not stay here," she said softly, though her voice carried more plea than warning. "If they see you, if they come again, they'll use you as the excuse they've been craving." His gaze held hers, steady as a mountain. "And leave you with them?" His words were simple, but their weight settled heavy in her chest. "I don't want you hurt because of us," she whispered. He looked past her to the cabin, then back to her, as though measuring the worth of her protest. "Your mother still breathes because I stayed," he said. "You still stand because I did not walk away." The truth of it silenced her. She folded her arms, hugging herself against the chill. He watched her for a long moment, then straightened from the tree. They fear what they do not know. Fear makes men cruel. "And you?" she asked before she could stop herself. "Do you not fear them?" A faint curve touched his lips, not quite a smile. "I fear only that I came too late." Her breath caught, for his words stirred something she had long buried. The fragile hope that someone might see her not as the daughter of an outsider, but simply as herself. She turned her face away, ashamed of the warmth rising in her cheeks. From the cabin came the sound of her mother's stirring, and Anna hurried inside, the warrior following without invitation yet without resistance. Her mother's eyes fluttered open, clouded with pain yet softening when they found him. "You should not linger here," her mother murmured, echoing Anna's earlier plea. "They will not forgive. Not him. Not us." Anna knelt beside her bed. "We'll find a way, Mama. We'll leave if we must." Her mother's hand trembled as it brushed Anna's cheek. "You've already left too much behind, my child. This land, this is all we have left of your father." At the mention of her father, silence pressed down on the room. He had been a dreamer, a settler who believed the prairie could be tamed with sweat and steel. His grave now lay beneath a stand of cottonwoods, and his name lingered on the lips of men who said he had been a fool for marrying a woman they called foreign. Anna had grown hardened to their whispers, but now the hatred had turned to fists, and she knew the graveyard might soon hold another marker. The warrior sat near the hearth, silent, his eyes never leaving them. Anna's mother studied him a long while. "You did not have to save me," she said finally. He inclined his head. "I could not watch them strike one who could not strike back." Her mother's lips pressed into a thin line. "That mercy will cost you." The warrior's gaze flicked to Anna, then back. "I know." Anna's throat tightened. There was spoken plain. His presence tied their fates together. The days that followed stretched taut as wire. Each sunrise brought whispers from town. Men gathering, women murmuring of shame, children pointing when Anna walked the dirt road to fetch water. Some nights she glimpsed shadows near the cabin, the glow of pipes in the dark, but none dared step closer while the Shawnee warrior stood guard. He spoke little, yet his silence wrapped around them like a shield. For Anna, the quiet hours bred thoughts she could not push aside. When he brought wood for the fire or repaired a broken shutter, she caught herself watching the strength in his hands. When he walked the boundary of the homestead, eyes sharp for danger. She wondered at the life he had left behind to linger here. She told herself it was gratitude, nothing more. Yet when their eyes met, her heart quickened with something far more dangerous than gratitude. One evening, as the sky bled with sunset, he found her by the well, her arms straining as she hauled the bucket. Without word, he took the rope from her hands, drawing it up with effortless strength. She stepped back, flustered. "You don't have to," she said. "I know," he answered simply, lowering the full bucket to her feet. Then he looked at her, the fading light deepening the shadows of his face. "But I will." The words were nothing more than truth, yet they rang in her heart like a vow. She turned quickly, lest he see how much it shook her. That night, sleep evaded her. She lay listening to the wind whistle through the cracks, her thoughts circling like restless hawks. She had never allowed herself to imagine a bond beyond survival, beyond duty. Yet with each passing day, the whisper grew louder. Perhaps there was more than fear, more than shame. Perhaps there was something worth fighting for. But the world beyond their small cabin did not sleep so peacefully. On the fifth night, a stone shattered the window, scattering shards across the floor. Anna's mother cried out, clutching her blanket, while Anna froze in terror. The warrior moved swiftly, bow in hand, and slipped into the night. Shouts carried on the wind, angry voices, the drunken courage of men who had gathered their hate into fire. Anna rushed to the door, but her mother clung to her arm. "Stay," she begged. She wrenched free, stepping into the yard just as torchlight flared along the fence line. A dozen men stood there, faces twisted, weapons in hand. One stepped forward, his voice dripping venom. "Send him out, girl, or we'll burn you all in with him." Her heart hammered. She glanced toward the trees where the warrior's shadow moved, unseen but near. She knew he could strike, could scatter them, but the cost would be blood that could never be washed clean. She stepped forward, trembling but unyielding. "You've taken enough from us," she called, her voice carrying more strength than she felt. "You'll not take him." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some spat, some cursed. One raised his rifle. But before the shot could ring out, the warrior emerged, tall and fierce, his bow drawn. "Leave," he commanded, his voice cutting to the night like thunder. For a moment, time held still. The fire crackled, the wind sighed, and the men hesitated, fear flickering beneath their rage. Then, slowly, one by one, they backed away, dragging their pride behind them. The torches fell, smothered in the dirt, until only darkness and silence remained. Anna's breath shook as she turned to him, his bow lowered, his chest rising and falling with controlled steadiness. Their eyes met, and in that gaze lay the truth she could no longer deny. Whatever this bond was, fragile and forbidden, it had already taken root. Her mother's voice broke the stillness. "They will not stop," she whispered from the doorway, fear and sorrow mingling in her eyes. "And neither will you." Anna stepped closer to the warrior, her heart pounding with both dread and longing. "Then what are we to do?" she asked, her voice raw. His answer was quiet, yet it settled like stone. "We stand. Together." And in that moment, beneath the endless prairie sky, Anna knew her life had crossed a threshold. The whispers of her heart had become a promise, and there would be no turning back. The fire in the canyon burned low, its glow casting long, jagged shadows across the rocks that hemmed them in. Smoke curled upward in thin blue wisps, carrying the scent of mesquite and charred pine. Lila sat close to the flames, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, as though holding herself together by sheer will. She had not spoken for near an hour, but her silence weighed heavier on Elias than any words could. Elias watched her from across the fire. The lines of hardship were carved into his weather-worn face, yet in the flicker of firelight his eyes softened, carrying a quiet ache that seemed to mirror her own. He had chosen this place of their camp because the canyon walls offered cover, but also because it was the last stop before the road forked, one way leading toward Dodge, the other back into outlaw country. The choice hung in the air like smoke, unspoken but felt by both. "You're thinking too hard," Elias said at last, his voice low and steady, the kind of voice that could soothe a spooked horse. Lila looked up, startled, then forced a faint smile that did not quite reach her eyes. I don't reckon I know how to think any other way, Elias. Not anymore. Her words cut him in ways he did not show. She had carried the burden of her brother's betrayal, the ruin it had brought on her family's name, and the way the town had turned its back on her. Elias knew that every step beside him was a step further into exile. He also knew she would never admit just how much it cost her. Sometimes, Elias said, shifting closer, his boots scuffing against the dirt, you gotta let the past sit where it lies. Ain't no use carrying the bones of it with you everywhere. Lila's eyes caught the firelight, glimmering with unshed tears. You think it's so easy to leave it behind? Folks whispering, accusing me of sins I never touched. And now, she stopped herself, her breath catching. Now I'm out here, hiding like I done something wrong. Maybe they're right. Maybe I am cursed. Elias reached for a stick and stirred the embers, sending sparks spiraling upward. He spoke without looking at her. Cursed folk don't ride into gunfire to save strangers. Cursed folk don't carry the weight of others on their shoulders till it near breaks them. You ain't cursed, Lila. You're just fighting a fight that ain't yours alone to bear. The words lingered between them, warm as the firelight itself. For a moment, the canyon seemed to still as if listening. Then Lila whispered, almost too soft to hear, "Why do you stand by me, Elias? You could walk away, leave me to my shame. Yet you don't." Elias looked at her then, truly looked, and for the first time let her see the truth written plain across his face. "Because I know what it is to be cast out, to have men call you sinner, liar, thief, when all you've done is try to survive. And because," he hesitated, the words catching in his throat, "because somewhere along this road, you stopped being a burden and started being the only reason I keep riding." Lila's breath trembled, the fire's glow painting her cheeks in shades of rose and gold. She turned her gaze away, but not before Elias caught the flicker of something. Hope, fear, maybe both, cross her face. Before he could say more, the night split with a distant echo of hoofbeats. Lila stiffened, hand going instinctively to the rifle at her side. Elias rose slowly, listening. The rhythm of the hooves was measured, deliberate, not the wild gallop of a rider fleeing, but the steady approach of men who knew exactly where they were headed. "They found us," Elias said grimly, scanning the canyon rim. "Could it be travelers?" Lila asked, though her tone held little conviction. "Not out here, not this hour." He spat into the dirt, jaw tightening. "It's them." The fire suddenly felt too bright, too loud. Elias kicked dirt over the flames, plunging them into near darkness, leaving only the faint glow of embers. The canyon became a cavern of shadow. Lila's heart pounded as she clutched the rifle. "How many, you reckon?" "Too many." Elias loaded his revolver with a practiced hand. "But numbers don't matter much. What matters is keeping you alive. I can fight. I know you can. But you're not dying out here, not for me." His words were hard, final, but Lila saw the fear beneath them, the fear of losing her. She wanted to argue, to tell him she would not be left behind, but the crack of a rifle shot from the canyon rim silenced her. Stones splintered inches from her head. "Down!" Elias barked, shoving her to the ground just as another shot rang out. Bullets rained like hail, chipping rock, filling the canyon with thunder. Elias fired back, his muzzle flashes strobing against the dark. The attackers shouted from above, their voices echoing. Men she recognized, townsmen who had once tipped their hats to her father, who had once danced at the harvest barn with her. Now their voices dripped with venom. "Bring her out, Elias. Ain't no use protecting the harlot. We'll see her hang come sunrise." Lila's blood ran cold. She pressed herself against the stone, bile rising in her throat. Harlot, the word cut deeper than the bullets. They would never believe her innocence. Their minds were set. Elias crouched beside her, reloading with quick, sure hands. His breath was ragged, his jaw clenched. "They won't take you, Lila. Not while I breathe." Tears burned her eyes, but she blinked them away. Fury sparking with despair had threatened to drown her. She gripped the rifle tighter. "Then we fight. Together." The battle that followed was a storm of gunfire and shouts. shadows darting along the canyon rim. Elias moved like a man possessed, his aim deadly, his resolve unshakable. Lila fired beside him, each shot fueled by years of swallowed shame, each bullet a defiance against the lies that had shackled her. Yet the men kept coming. For every one that fell, another took his place. The canyon seemed to close in, a tomb waiting to swallow them whole. At last, a shot rang out that was different. Closer. Elias staggered, his revolver slipping from his grasp. Lila cried out, catching him as he fell to one knee, blood blooming across his side. "No, Elias, stay with me." His breath came ragged, but his eyes burned with fire. "Don't stop fighting, Lila. Don't you dare." Something inside her broke, and with it came a strength she had never known. She rose, standing tall against the onslaught, her rifle steady though her hands trembled. The attackers hesitated, thrown by the sight of her. Lila, the woman they had named Cursed, standing unbroken in the firelight of her fury. "You call me sinner," she shouted, her voice echoing off the canyon walls. "You call me cursed. But it's you, every one of you, that carries the sin of hatred and lies. I'll not bow, and I'll not hang for your falsehoods." Her words struck like bullets, and in the silence that followed, she fired again, her shot finding its mark. The fight dragged on, but something had shifted. Doubt crept into the attackers' shouts. Their fire slowed. One by one, shadows retreated, hoofbeats pounding as they pulled back into the night. And then, at last, the canyon fell silent but for the crackle of dying embers. Lila dropped to her knees beside Elias, pressing her hands to his wound, tears streaming freely now. "Stay with me. Please don't leave me." Elias's hand found hers, his grip weak but sure, his lips curved in the faintest of smiles. "I told you you weren't cursed. Fire's in you, Lila. Always was." She bent close, her tears falling on his bloodied shirt. "I can't do this without you." "You won't have to." His voice was fading, yet steady as stone. "We'll ride this road together, one way or another." The night closed around them, the canyon holding its breath. In the silence, beneath the stars and the firelight, redemption was not found in words, nor in the retreat of their enemies, but in the bond forged in blood and defiance, the bond that even death would struggle to break. And as dawn's first light crept over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, Lila knew this was not the end. It was the beginning, a beginning carved in firelight, sealed in sacrifice, and bound by the unyielding truth of the heart.